Hello, everyone. Welcome to attend the Asiagraphics webinar. I'm Lingo, the second chair of this webinar tonight. And today we invite two speakers. The first speaker is Yuki Endo. His talk is exploring WoW with a single image. And the second speaker is Yuki Lai. His talk is about face video generation and editing. Let me introduce the first speaker. The first speaker, Yuki Endo, is an assistant professor in University of Tsukuba. Previously, he worked as a researcher at the NTT Laboratory. He received his BS, MS, and PhD degree in engineering from University of Tsukuba. His research topics center on image synthesis, image editing, data mining, and machine learning. He is currently interested in applying machine learning to explore exciting image editing applications. And now let's invite the first speaker to the Yuki Endo to give the talk. Hi.
Hi. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Could you see my slide?
All right. I think it's good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for the introduction. And it's great pleasure and my honor to have this opportunity. Today, I'm going to talk about our works for image and video synthesis with single images. So yeah, the title is Exploring WoW with Single Images. So first, let me start my presentation with self-introduction. My name is Yuki Endo, and I am an assistant professor in University of Tsukuba in Japan. I also graduated from this university from bachelor to PhD courses. My supervisor was Professor Kanamori, and I am working with him now. He also gave me advice about preparing this talk, and I would like to thank him here. My research theme when I was a student was image editing, and I wanted to do research that makes people say, wow, only with single images, as I will introduce later. Also, previously, I worked as a researcher in NTT Corporation, which is a telephone company in Japan, but conduct a broad range of research and development. I was engaged on research on data mining there. So I would like to briefly introduce our previous research projects. When I was a bachelor and master student, I worked on projects using single images as input, aimed at synthesizing real-world phenomena such as water flow stain, weathering, and wavy reflection. And after that, in NTT laboratories, I conducted research on positional data mining for live logging services. So these projects are different from computer graphics. For example, as you can see in the right, here, we want to estimate transportation modes from GPS trajectories. In this case, we used deep neural networks to find effective feature representations from input trajectories. And we also developed a method for destination prediction. This work predicts a user's destination from partial trajectories using recurrent neural networks. Okay. Since around, I became an assistant professor we started research on image synthesis and editing using deep learning that I learned from data mining project. However, applying general deep neural networks like UNet to specific tasks did not always work due to the problem complexity. So we needed to carefully incorporate respective domain knowledge into models. These three projects are the cases. For example, single image HDR inference, human image relighting, and animating landscape images. Also, we developed image editing techniques with user interaction, such as edit propagation, semantic image synthesis, and GAN image manipulation. Today, I introduce mainly these three topics. The first project is deep reverse tone mapping, and this work was published at SIGGRAPH Asia 2017. First, I'd like to start with background. As you may know, commodity cameras can capture only limited luminance range. For example, with changing camera exposure values, we can take photographs with varying brightness. With low exposure, we can capture the brightness of the sky, but the leaves are blacked out like this. In contrast, with high exposure, the leaves can be captured, but the sky is saturated. As we can see, low dynamic range or LDR images cannot capture the such rich tone variations in the real world. In contrast, high dynamic range or HDR images can capture rich tone variations. To generate an HDR image, photographers conventionally take multiple LDR images with varying exposures and merge them. Such LDR images are called bracketed images. Also, special devices for capturing HDR images or videos are under active development. Unfortunately, such devices are still unaffordable, and both approaches cannot be applied to the enormous images available on the web. So our goal is to simply infer an HDR image from a single LDR image. This problem is challenging and ill-posed because we must compensate lost data caused by under or overexposure and color quantization. So now I review some related work. Single image techniques for reconstructing HDR images are called reverse tone mapping. Existing reverse tone mapping operators employ heuristics and optionally use manual intervention, but it cannot compensate missing information of clipped regions sufficiently. To enrich the clipped regions, example-based techniques transfer texture details from appropriately exposed patches. The disadvantage is that we must specify reference images and regions manually. So in this work, we proposed the first reverse tone mapping method based on deep learning, which can handle both, try to handle both overexposed and underexposed pixels. Here is an example pair of an LDR input and our HDR output. Let us see the difference in detail. So this is the LDR input. And as you can see, the woods are almost black. Indeed, the most pixels on woods are underexposed. Here, we visualize the underexposed pixels by painting them in red or magenta. If we increase exposure, we can see the underexposed pixels remain black or become noisy. This is our HDR output with zone mapping. As you see, the underexposed pixels now have plausible colors. To realize deep learning-based inference, a straightforward way would be a direct end-to-end learning. So we actually tried this using a network similar to pix-to-pix. However, we could not plausibly reproduce even training data, especially in dark regions. This is probably due to instability of training, slight variations of pixel values, and the lack of sufficient training data in order to learn large tone variations. So instead of the direct approach, we adopt an indirect approach for learning less variations. We first learn a series of bracketed LDR images with increased and decreased exposures and infer bracketed images. We then reconstruct an HDR image by merging the bracketed LDR images using conventional algorithms. So in summary, our contributions are mainly twofold. First, we propose the first deep learning-based framework for automatically inferring an HDR image from a single LDR input. Second, we propose a network model designed to infer bracketed images with increased and decreased exposures, as well as how to generate its training data. This is the overview of our framework, and the flow is basically decomposed into 3 phases. The first phase is to create training data. To learn exposure changes, we first create the bracketed LDR images from HDR databases by simulating cameras. Here we use multiple camera response functions in the database to get various LDR images. The second phase is to train our networks, and we train 2 networks using the bracketed LDR images. Finally, we infer an HDR image, and from a single input LDR image, the trained models compute LDR images with varying exposures. The final HDR image is then generated from these bracketed LDR images. Now I introduce the architecture of our network. Here, the unique point is that we use 3D decomposition decoder and connect it to the 2D convolution encoder using skip connections. Our input is a single RGB image, and our outputs are multiple RGB images. So from a 3D tensor, our network outputs as 4D tensor. For more details, please refer to our paper. In the training phase, we train 2 models of the same architecture. Namely, the up exposure model is for increasing exposure, and the down exposure model is for decreasing exposure. We train them separately, assuming that our up and down exposure networks learn different features. For example, in the training of the up exposure model, it learns to predict brighter LDR images in this direction. And for the down exposure model, we train it so that it predicts darker LDR images in this reverse direction. Next, I explain a little more detail on the training of our up exposure model. Given the input image, the network outputs are for the tensor like this, and we train the network by minimizing the differences between the network output and ground truth brighter bracketed images. We'd like to utilize as many images as possible so that the network can learn relative exposure change. So we repeatedly compute losses by shifting the input and ground truth images like this and this. This is the loss function for the up exposure model. And we measure the differences between ground truth and network output by L1 norm. Here, the zero tensor padding and the masking are used to adjust the length of the input and output when we shift the input. The down exposure model is also optimized similarly. So we conducted a quantitative evaluation by comparing differences between inferred HDR images and ground truth. As an evaluation metric, we use the Q-score of HDR VDP2, which can compute visibility difference based on human perception. We computed the Q-scores averaged over about 700 scenes. As we can see in the right graph, our results record best scores, and here our sRGB is a result learned only with a single sRGB camera response function. So this indicates that learning multiple CR camera response functions is helpful. Here are some qualitative comparisons with the scene, and if we observe these regions, we can see the differences like this. Compared to others, our method reproduces the most plausible colors. This is another set of results. And here, the sky region is largely saturated. As you can see, the sky region remains empty in other results, but in our results, cloud-like patterns appear. Okay. However, we think our results have several artifacts and they are still not subjectively perfect. Actually, recently, Hange et al. Pointed out discrepancy between objective and subjective quality scores in some single image HDR reconstruction methods. They also proposed a new evaluation protocol more correlated with subjective quality. So although our results have room for improvement, we hope that our first effort for this task using deep learning stimulates the future work. Next, I will introduce this project. This project is animating landscape, which is a project for a single image video synthesis. Okay, and to animate a single still image, a simple solution is to use commercial software such as Adobe After Effects. However, it requires daunting manual operations. Let's see an example. This video shows how to create an animation from a single image. And as you see, the artist has to manually specify object areas, such as the water surface and sky, as well as motion direction. And user also needs to add some lighting effects, something like that. So our goal is animating landscape, and we aim to automatically synthesize a video from a single landscape image. Our main targets are time-lapse videos, especially with skies and waters. The prior work of video synthesis can be divided into two categories. The first category is the example-based approach. For example, this work generated fluid motion in a single image by synthesizing flows in reference video database. Also, some methods reproduce time-varying appearance, such as day-to-night transition, by a fine color mapping induced from a reference time-lapse video. Another category, the learning-based approach, does not require reference videos. For example, Vondrik et al. Showed impressive results by using 3D convolutional neural networks. Then Lee et al. Generated more photorealistic videos by learning flow fields in a supervised manner. This method focused on motion, whereas some methods focus on color appearance. As you can see, style transfer method can reproduce color transitions like this. Now we summarize the problem of our prior work. On one hand, the example-based approach requires appropriate reference videos. Also, the cost for video synthesis is high, for example, due to optimization. On the other hand, the learning-based approach does not require reference videos, but the results are monotonous and short-term animations. Additionally, the quality of generated videos is still low, and that is low resolution and flickering artifacts. So with these problems in mind, we would like to develop a video generation method with following advantages. First, we want to predict videos at low cost without reference videos. Second, resultant animations should be diverse in terms of moving clouds, changing sky color, and rippling waters, and so on. Finally, their quality must be high, that is high resolution and without flickering. To this end, our key idea comes from an observation that motion and appearance in time-lapse videos have different time scale and spatial frequencies. In particular, motion of clouds and waters changes rapidly, while appearance of sky changes slowly with smooth spatial variation. Because learning both factors in a single model is not straightforward, we train two models separately with control mechanisms using latent codes. As network architectures for learning motion and appearance, we adopt 2D CNNs in contrast to 3D CNNs for the previous work. Using 2D CNNs, we are not limited by the number of output frames thanks to recurrent feeding and latent space interpolation I explained later. Also, we predict output frames indirectly. Most of the previous work predicts output frames directly, but the pixel-wise inference of high-resolution images is difficult and suffers from overfitting. Instead, our method learns regularized and smooth intermediate maps in a self-supervised manner to reduce overfitting. Now I explain the details of our video synthesis pipeline. From this input image, our motion predictor generates a backward flow sequence. Using these backward flows, we apply warping to the input image to generate animated frames. We next make the warped frames looped if needed, and then our appearance predictor computes color transfer maps for each frame. We obtain final output videos by applying color transfer to each frame. We also introduce latent codes to handle future uncertainty. Now I explain the details of inference with each predictor and their training. In the inference phase, our motion predictor infers a single backward flow field. Because prediction holds future uncertainty, we introduce an environment factor as a latent code. With a different latent code, we get a different output flow like this. And then we warp the input image using the flow and obtain the output image. To predict the next frame, we recurrently feed predicted frames to the network and obtain multiple flow fields. We can reconstruct sequential output images from the input image and the flow sequence. And to train our motion predictor, we use two loss functions. The first one is a pixel-wide L2 loss between the prediction and the ground truth of the next frame. The second one is a weighted total variation loss based on the next frame. This is used to smoothen the backward flows. Also, we need latent codes as input during training. These latent codes are generated by our motion encoder from the backward flows. However, the problem here is that the ground truth flows are not available. So our solution is to reuse the predicted flows for each scene during the training phase like this. Next, I explain the inference process with our appearance predictor. First, our appearance predictor generates color transfer maps, each encoding 3 channel parameters required for color transfer. We can obtain the output image by applying color transfer to the input image. By feeding multiple latent codes, we obtain multiple output images. Here, unlike the recurrent prediction for motion, we feed a latent code sequence to reproduce appearance transitions. If we employ a recurrent prediction used for motion, error accumulates in the RGB color space, and we obtain visually poor results, as you can see in the bottom right. To tackle this, we employ temporal interpolation in a latent space. This makes our approach tolerant to error accumulation and flicker-free. This slide shows training for our appearance predictor. First, we use a content loss to preserve the input image content in the output image. Second, we use a weighted total variation loss to smoothen the color transfer maps according to the input image. Third, we use 2 losses for transferring the style and the spatial color distribution of the target frame. For more details of our loss functions, please refer to our paper. Finally, our appearance encoder extracts the latent code from the target frame. Each latent code implicitly represents a time factor, such as daytime, evening, or night. Here, we now compare results, and the 3 videos in the top right show that compare methods generate low resolution and short-term videos. Although Lee et al.'s method predicts optical flows, the quality is low. In contrast, our method can generate high-resolution videos with plausible flows according to the scene structure. Our method can also generate longer-term videos with appearance transitions like this. Here is also a comparison with the attribute manipulation method using deep learning. As you see, the prior work in the middle causes flickering artifacts, while ours on the right is a smooth transition. Here, I explain the limitations of our method. As you can see at the bottom right, in the red circle, very long-term predictions for motion cause unnatural distortions. This is because error accumulates in flow fields by recurrent prediction. Our method is also difficult to generalize to various some outdoor scenes. So after our paper published, various methods for single image video generation have been proposed, such as deep landscape, endless loops, and Aurelian motion fields. These methods can generate more realistic animations for various scenes. As you can see in the bottom figure, the recent technique also allows the user to control fluid directions by annotating the image. Okay, finally, I would like to introduce this project. This project tackled the problem of editing against image layout. And I'm going to present this work at Asiagraphics next week. So I'd like to start with background. And as you may know, exploring latent space for controlling GANs is a recent hot topic. It's also called latent space navigation, GAN steerability, etc. This technique aims to discover interpretable latent directions in the latent space. For example, as you see in here, we can manipulate age for a human face by moving a latent code along a specific direction. However, existing approaches for latent code exploration have some problems. There are mainly two approaches for this task. The supervised approach uses a classifier that detects attributes such as gender and age. However, its manipulations are limited to predefined attributes and needs training data for classifying attributes. Meanwhile, the unsupervised approach does not require such training data, but struggles to identify latent directions. Also, as you can see, both approaches perform 1D operations using a slider interface. As a result, it's difficult to intuitively control spatial layouts like poses. So our goal is to intuitively control style GAN image layout by annotating an image directly. In the left image, the user specifies a movement direction on a cat body using a mouse. Given such user input, we want to estimate an edited image like this. So our research question is it possible to control latent codes in accordance with user annotations on the image? To this end, we propose a novel latent transformer conditioned on user inputs. This can transform input latent codes into edited latent codes using the user input. The edited latent codes are fed to StyleGANs to obtain edited images like this. However, there remains ambiguity about where the parts move. For example, the 4 feet in the red circle move down with the body. To alleviate this ambiguity, we propose to use anchor points to specify points that should not move. Given anchor points, our latent transformer manipulates the latent codes so that the 4 feet positions do not change as much as possible. Also, specifying anchor points on the ears, we can see that their positions are fixed. Meanwhile, 2D mouse dragging like this cannot handle 3D motion. So we use additional keystrokes to specify 3D motion. Here is an example of zooming out, and here is an example of zooming in. Because our method edits images in the latent space, we can apply other latent code manipulations together, such as style mixing. A latent transformer was recently proposed by Yao et al. It's defined as this equation. Given latent codes, W and the parameter alpha, it moves the latent codes along a direction obtained from a DNA-based function. This figure shows an example of latent code manipulation using a latent transformer for adding glasses. Different from the existing latent transformer, we use user inputs U as additional inputs. Conditioned on U, our latent transformer is defined as this equation. Here, the user input U consists of a set of k motion vectors V and start point P. As you see in here, our latent transformer estimates edited latent codes in accordance with multiple user inputs specified on the images. To design a latent transformer, we first considered using existing architectures. Existing work uses multi-layer perceptron, as shown in the right figure. However, image manipulations are limited to fixed attributes such as glasses and gender. So MLP-based architecture is inappropriate to our problem setting, which uses variable length inputs. To solve this problem, we develop a latent transformer based on transformer encoder decoder to handle multiple user inputs. This slide shows the architecture of our latent transformer, but I omit the details to explanation due to the time limit. And in this slide, I explain a training pipeline for our latent transformer. In a single iteration of training time, we first generate 2 images randomly using a StyleGAN. To do so, we first sample latent codes from prior and then randomly perturb them. Next, we estimate 3D optical flows using a pre-trained optical flow model. We then subsample the optical flows to reduce computational cost for the transformer encoder decoder. Finally, we use these obtained flows as pseudo user inputs for the latent transformer. Here, we minimize the loss function between the perturbed latent codes and latent transformer outputs. This slide shows some of our results, and we can manipulate images in accordance with user inputs. In particular, specifying anchor points prevents some parts from moving with other parts. Okay. This slide shows a comparison with the existing method CEPHA. Here, lower left values in the CEPHA results indicate adjusted parameters, namely latent direction ID and editing amount. CEPHA is an unsupervised approach and can find interpretable latent directions, but it needs to identify and tune different parameters and cannot always reproduce results like ours. I also discuss our limitations, and our method sometimes struggles to preserve content in images. For example, the upper left figure shows disappearance of glasses on human face, and in the right figure, extreme user input also causes identity change for a cat. Localized control is also difficult. For example, specifying many anchor points to change the tire size only would change the cart shape globally. This is because training data are created by randomly manipulating latent codes, but this manipulation itself is not completely disentangled. Finally, I want to introduce some exciting concurrent works. Here, P and A in the left figure can extract latent directions for local regions. This can be achieved by semi-non-negative tensor factorization for style GAN feature maps. And blob GAN in the right figure learns to associate different blobs with different entities in a scene. But I cannot play the video here. It can arrange these blobs to capture scene layout. So in the future, I am interested in enabling more fine-grained control for image generative models like this. Finally, I summarized today's talk. I talked about image synthesis and editing applications with single images using deep learning. In this talk, I introduced methods for a single HDR reconstruction and landscape video generation and GAN image layout manipulation. We hope that our insights will facilitate future research by providing novel deep learning solutions to explore WoW with single images. And if you are interested in our projects, please visit our website. Okay, that's all. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, very nice talk. So, is there any question? So I have one question. Professor Endo, I have a question is for the second work, how to obtain the same parameters such as the one parameter input into the motion prediction network. How to obtain the same parameter such as the wind parameter input into the motion prediction network.
Okay, thank you for the question. Wait a moment. Do you mean, sorry, do you mean what is the parameter for motion predictor?
Yes, the wind speed of the parameter of the wind speed, how to estimate or how to input the speed of the wind.
Do you mean this latent code?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Our method estimate this latent code parameters used from videos in databases and using encoder. So we use encoder to extract this latent code from videos in the database. That's my answer. Does it answer your question?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
And I have another question, and a very nice talk, and also very inspired. So the second question that in the third work, I find that the identity had also been changed when editing the face or animal images. It is easy to keep the identity of the face unchanged, just change the pose. I see some examples. The identity of the face has also been changed. It is possible to keep the identity, the ID of the face unchanged. Is it possible to keep?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Is your question? I can keep identity in, for example, in this in this image. Sorry, do you mean?
Yes. Could you keep the identity? Is there some laws to ensure this? Yes. Is there some loss function to keep the ID unchanged, or there is no loss, but the result could not.
I see. Actually, our method cannot keep identity as I show in this slide. For example, if we move extremely this human face to extremely move, and we will obtain, we cannot keep identity of this person.
Okay, I think that there would be some. This would be some future work maybe. But,
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Endo. Very nice talk. And we thank the professor. The nice talk again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.